Welcome everyone to the 5th Africa Regulatory Conference. Thank you for joining us for this third day of the conference. Yesterday, we listened to excellent perspective and discussions from regulators and industry on regulatory reliance and on the management of post-approval changes to benefit African patients. Today, during this 3-hour webinar, we will reflect on how can Africa pioneer regulatory system innovation and digitalization. In the upcoming session, we will do a deep dive on digitalization and highlight what is happening at continental and regional level. The second session will focus on regulatory agilities from the pandemic and the ability of regulatory systems to incorporate innovation and change. Before I hand over to my colleague, Teresa Eastwood-Kiefer, who will be moderating the digitalization session, I would like to share with you few housekeeping details. Next slide, please. So the Africa Regulatory Conference will be held in English with simultaneous interpretation services in French and Portuguese. For this, you have down at the bottom of your screen a little globe where you can switch languages. And we encourage you to use the Q&A toolbox located also at the bottom of the screen to raise any questions that you might have for speakers and panelists. We have muted all the microphones to ensure a good sound quality. And please note that there is also, when you use the Q&A box, to like or vote for a question that was already posted. So we can also encourage you to use this function. As you might have noted, during the previous days of the conference, we are using Mentimeter as a tool to engage with the audience. And we really value your input and invite you to actively use this tool again today to engage with our speakers and panelists during the session. And as a final point, this conference is being recorded. All our presentations from the speakers and the videos from the different days of the conference will be made available on the Africa Regulatory Conference website following the conference. You could also find on our website the bios and photos of our speakers and panelists participating to the conference this week. I wish you all a very good conference and successful outcomes. So it is time now to launch our 5th track on digitalization. Over to you, Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining day 3 of this exciting conference. Today's session on digitalization will be just as exciting, and I really have the privilege to moderate it. My name is Teresa Eastwood-Kiefer. I'm a chapter leader of the Regulatory Data and Content chapter within Hoffmann La Roche, and I'm also a member of the FPA ECTD working group. And I'm here today representing industry. We will kick off today's session with me really setting this scene briefly on the future. We will then hear from 3 esteemed regulators who will bring us up to speed on the initiatives on their respective regions to really raise awareness. We will then deep dive further into how we can all collaborate with our excellent lineup of speakers in a moderated dialogue. And then I have the chance to open the floor to ask questions from all of you participants. So I encourage everyone to actively participate, share, and most importantly, let's learn all together. Next slide, please. So throughout the first days of the conference, for those of you that had the chance to attend, we heard the speakers use the slogan, work sharing and reliance are the 21st century regulatory tool. And we would like to add that digitalization is the backbone of this tool. To be truly successful and to see these accelerated timelines that we heard in the conference of being able to have medicine approvals from 3 years from 3 months, from 2 years down to 3 months is really amazing. And we really believe that digitalization can support. Regulatory digitalization in Africa is really at an inflection point. With the establishment of the African Medicines Agency in 2021, we really have this opportunity to bridge gaps across the continent and really connect via interoperable systems. So we really see Africa as being able to rapidly become one of the most efficient and modern regulatory systems in the world, drawing from decades of experience. But what will that take? And so that's why we're really all here today. On that note, I really invite you to join me now in kicking off our session with a strong message. We want to hear all your perspectives. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So if you could all please bring out your phones as we pull up the Mentimeter and scan the QR code. I invite you to type in 1 or few words what you believe are the most critical factors for the successful digitalization of Africa regulatory system. So one word would be great, a few words would be great as well. And it would be great if we could already start to display the word cloud, all the words that come to your mind, really thinking in what will it take to be successful? Absolutely. Budget comes first. Capacity building, yes. Absolutely. Harmonization, willingness, money, yes. Absolutely. Fantastic. Great to see. Great to see these word clouds shaping. Yes, internet, strength of the systems, not reinventing the wheel, a really key theme that we will discuss today. So as we start to see the word cloud forming, we'll also hopefully have the final word cloud available to you with the conference material. And with that, I'd like to really thank you for starting us strong here. I really like the words that are here, and I think this is absolutely fantastic to set us off because we will be covering a lot of these challenges and opportunities. So thank you all so much. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. What I will do now is I'll very swiftly propel us into the future state. So for just a few moments, literally a few minutes, please think future state for a moment and why this is so important for digitalization in Africa today. On this slide, you can see it's very busy. You can see various ongoing digital transformation strategies and data initiatives within the EU and the US. The conundrum really is that with the proliferation of AI and AI-aided technologies, digital health tools, these are in turn really aiding larger quantities of structured data and new data types to become available to regulators, which is great. But this in turn, of course, requires new systems and new tools to share and analyze them. So our current approaches, the way that we have our submissions today, risk limiting regulatory assessments in the future. The EU is therefore developing interoperable systems to advance cloud submissions within the EU legal framework. And the US FDA is also implementing the Technology Modernization Action Plan. So these are just examples of some of the initiatives that are happening. Next slide, please. What we're seeing is that we're referring to this shift towards the proliferation of data and the availability of data into what we call shifting the paradigm from data to a data-driven regulatory future. In this current state that we have today, we're really relying on submissions that are static, they're paper-based. This really leads to disparate repositories, inefficient country-by-country reviews that are usually happening sequential order. The future will hopefully leverage harmonized structured data standards, cloud-based submissions that are rolling and dynamic in review, which will allow regulators to have continuous assessments. And this will hopefully then also increase the reliance on the work sharing initiatives, where we've seen much success, and we've heard in the conference in a couple of days, some of these successes in Africa region with Zazibona. And if we can now move to my last slide to conclude. Before we can think of this shift, though, we have to really acknowledge the fact that we have to take a step back and recognize the challenges of Africa, of course, being a huge continent, 54 countries, 5 regions, and all the national variance that comes with it. So the path to digital transformation is really multifaceted, but it's also multi-year. It's really a journey. So the progress that we've made so far on the foundational steps that we can see here at the bottom are already really there. We see digitizing of the ECPPs, for example. We see countries and regions in Africa that are implementing online portals. We heard of Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Ghana, Ethiopia as examples. And then when we get higher up into the digitalization journey, we see also some great progress made on implementation of CTD for documents and eCTD according to ICH standards. And this is already used in many jurisdictions. And we have South Africa, for instance, pioneering, and regions like ECOWAS joining as well with eCTD. So this step has shown tremendous benefits, especially in easing post-approval changes, and we will hear about these benefits in the discussion later today. So getting these foundational steps right really will pave the way for this future state that we've been discussing. We have the possibility to then move up with data submissions in the future, where we will really see the possibility for data standards to lead into the interoperability of systems, which will therefore lead to structured data submissions that support consistent high-quality evaluation and decision-making of medicines. So for instance, the US FDA has the Knowledge-Aided Assessment and Structured Application, CASA, which will really streamline their quality review processes. Looking further into the future, these advancements will further usher in advanced data analytics, artificial intelligence, and all these exciting tools within the regulatory framework that can allow for automated support to regulators. And when it comes to the transformational state at the very top, there are really a lot of initiatives already with regulators and industry working together to develop a new platform for cloud submissions, for example. We have pilots ongoing with nonprofits like Accumulus Synergy, and they're starting really on a small scale with certain regulators that can take the risks to get off the ground. And later on, more regulators can benefit to these solutions and really make the solutions work for all health authorities, irrespective of size and resource. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope this sparks some food for thought and really thinking about the future. And without further ado, I would now like to hand over to our first presenter. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. We will begin with Mr. Emmanuel Owusu-Adazi. Emmanuel is an Information Technology Officer with the Information Management and Technology Solutions Department of the Food and Drug Authority in Ghana. He is currently a member of the IMS Technical Committee for African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization. Mr. Owusu-Adazi will share with us a brief overview of the progress of the IMS Technical Committee. I'd like to just take a moment to remind the audience that you can already use the Zoom function for any questions that you may have throughout the presenters' sessions, and we will address them towards the end. So Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Teresa, and thank you all, and good afternoon and good evening to all for this opportunity. I'm happy to be part of this conference, and I'm grateful. Thank you. So once again, my name is Emmanuel Owusu-Adazi. I'm with the Food and Drugs Authority, Ghana, and also a member of the AMRH IMS TC. So a quick one, I'm here today to present some initiative that is currently happening at the continental level. All right, so this is a brief introduction of the IMS-TC. So the IMS-TC our main purpose is to advise the AMRH Technical Steering Committee on IMS systems. So basically, our role is to look at what kind of initiatives that we can bring on board to help the African continent. So some of our roles also include, we also provide and support monitoring of implementation of IMS activities. We also advise at the continental level and also reviewing of existing systems. Next slide, please.
Emmanuel, before we carry on with the next slide, we cannot see you on the screen. It might be that the video is off.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much. There we go. Fantastic.
Okay,
thank you.
Great.
Please carry on.
All right. Next slide, please. All right. So I'm starting with some of our initiatives. So currently, the IMS-TC, we've developed the website for the AMRH. So the website was launched last year. In December 2002, we launched the website. So basically, the website houses all AMRH activities. So news, reports, letters, and also we have all the technical committees, their profile, and the vision, the mission statement of AMRH. So anything concerning AMRH can be found on the website. So we achieved this in December 2022, and currently is being updated and also upgraded. Great. So the one beautiful thing is that on the website you can find activities like countries that are into alcohols or that have a regional alcohols. You can filter countries that are alcohols, countries that are doing registrations, countries that are into pharmacovigilance, clinical trials. So it's a whole tool that can help you find information real time. There's no need to jump into maybe TMDA website or go to Ghana website. Right on the platform, you can quickly or you can easily move onto an NRA website. Next slide, please. All right, so one of the key initiatives that currently is ongoing is the information sharing portal. So this portal is developed for adoption to be used by the NRAs, the RECs, and AMA. We believe AMA can also leverage on this system. So the project currently is ongoing, and basically what the system is for is basically for information sharing purposes. So the purpose is to allow NRAs to share information, registered products, clinical trials information, and any other information within the regulatory framework. So this portal, one can see from their respective recs all products that are registered within the regional block. So for instance, if you want products that are registered in ECOWAS, so on the portal, you can go right to ECOWAS, you can find all the 15 countries under ECOWAS products that are registered within that block. Same as if you want products that are registered within EAC, you can also find on that platform products that are registered within the EAC platform. So it's a one-stop shop where you can find all registered products within the regional blocks. Yeah. So, and we also believe that AMA can leverage on this system. So currently, engagements are also ongoing to define other information that can be shared on the platform. And hopefully before the end of September, a consultant will be engaged to look at the user requirement specifications and also advise on some of the key informations that needs to be shared on the platform. All right. Next slide, please. Great. Also, we have the model RIMS, or the regulatory information management system. Okay, so in 2019, a consultant, we engaged a consultant to assist us in conducting scope exercises in all the 55 member states within the African Union. So what we did was to look at the information management systems in these NRAs. Okay, so out of the scoping exercise, it came out that 20 NRAs have robust IMS systems. Okay, only 20 NRAs have IMS systems. And this is because in Africa, most IMS systems that supports these core regulatory functions needs to be enhanced and to meet the WHO maturity 3 requirement. So last year, the team met in Uganda, and we looked at a scoping exercise for 8 countries. So the countries were Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Namibia, Uganda. So we looked at their systems. So we did a selection criteria to look at their systems to see which systems best suit that if we want to recommend to the African continent that can help with countries who probably don't have robust IMS systems. So out of the 8 systems that we looked at, TMDA system, that is a Tanzania Medicines and Medical Devices Authority system, came out as the robust system that houses all the 9 core functions of the regulatory activities. So we also looked at whether the system supports ML requirements, whether the system have IP ownership, meaning that if they have the source code of the system. You also look whether the system have information sharing capabilities, platforms, whether they have APIs where they can connect to other systems. The challenge we had with the other systems that are not robust was that these systems were disjointed, okay, and they were not interoperable, meaning that they cannot communicate to other systems within or among countries, or even they were non-functional, or even they were not existing. So currently what is happening is that we are looking into the TMDA system, and also we are looking, if possible, we engage a consultant to develop a system that is a model system that we can also recommend for Africa, that countries who do not have regulatory information management system can leverage on these systems to help in their regulatory activities. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, so one last thing that we are also looking is the the ECTD and e-submission management system. Okay, so currently what we are doing as IMSTC team is to create awareness at the continental level that ECTD is the best way to go. ECTD is the best way to do business. Let me say, if you want to do business globally, ECTD is the way to go. So we are currently creating awareness in all ongoing meetings, all technical committees meetings, AMRH steering committee meetings, COMRA meetings, leveraging on ECOWAS experience. I believe most of us know that ECOWAS currently have kickstarted the process of going in for ECTD. So what we've done as a team is that we've created promotional videos trying to educate NRAs and the regional blocs that ECTD is not difficult. This is the best way to go if you want to move or to go ahead or to do something globally. ECTD is the way to go. And what we are also trying to is to demystify that ECTD is not difficult. Most people think ECTD is difficult and that it's complex and that we cannot go there. But we are saying, hey, ECTD is the way to go. And what we are also advising is that if maybe you can't even go full ECTD, you can start with baby step, that is e-submission, right? So if you move from e-submission, then you think, you believe the process is comfortable, then gradually can transition into ECTD. So in future, we are looking at where we can have a central a system or a repository system where all dossiers can be managed at the continental level. Okay, so we are looking at where dossiers can be fetched at the continental level, where REX can fetch dossiers, and even globally, they can even do submission from that central system. So if maybe EAC needs a dossier to work on quickly, they go into that portal. If maybe let's say ECOWAS needs that system, they go into that management system to fetch information. So it makes accessing information easier. It will make accessing information easier. And also it will streamline regulatory processes. When we have these portals, I believe that is going to help. So ECTD is the way to go. And currently, this is what we are doing, creating awareness and also demystifying the fact that ECTD is not difficult. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the summary of what I just touched on. So the website enhancement, we achieved this in 2022, December, and its upgrade is still ongoing. We've also ongoing the development of regulatory information management system that is also ongoing. A consultant will be engaged before the end of September this month. And also with the model REMS, that is the regulatory information management system, a consultant is also about to be appointed in September 2023. And also the provision of ECTD solutions. Awareness is currently ongoing and leveraging on ECOWAS experience. Thank you. Over, Teresa.
Thank you so much for enlightening us on this vast amount of work, Emmanuel. It's really no small feat to do this global outreach that you've done. And it's really great to hear of TMDA's robust regulatory information management system and how this could be possibly leveraged, as well as all the work that you're doing with ECTD. And I thank you also for the call out that ECTD is the way to go. We look forward to discussing with you further and how we can all support your team in these endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Next, I would like to welcome Cristina Prusati. She's a Digital Business Transformation Program e-submission Senior Coordinator at the European Medicines Agency. Cristina joined the EMA in January 2002 and really has been focusing on the implementation of electronic submissions at the agency ever since. Cristina also represents the EMA e-submissions related stakeholder groups and represents the EU region as the regulatory chair of ICH M8. Cristina, we're really delighted to have you next and to hear from you on the developments of the EMA. Over to you.
Hello, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening. How is everyone today? I hope you are all keen to hear how we did it in Europe and how we're going to continue improving our systems. So we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. We can jump over this disclaimer. And here, I thought I'll start with confusing you all with this very busy slide. This gives a journey of our product lifecycle management value stream. This really is there to show you that we are going to a very customer-centric approach. So we want to bring together a journey that has multiple different parts. So we want to pave a smooth and coherent user journey for all stakeholders that are involved. So not only the regulators, not only industry, but also everybody who uses the medicines that we authorize, everyone who needs to find out information about the medicines that we authorize. And this, of course, covers both human and veterinary domains. Similarly to the African continent, the EU is a large continent with several different countries. And with the EU, with all the different member states, we have different kind of readiness across the different member states. So we are really trying to harmonize and make it a smooth journey for everyone. So this shows the different parts. How do we capture data for the regulatory processes? How do we validate this data? We assess it and analyze the data. We do need to store that data using great standards and specifications. And then, of course, make sure that we share that data and the information that we hold across the life cycle. And this is to bring that value for all our customers. So we can move to the next slide. If we drill in a little bit more into the actual electronic submissions. And with the electronic submissions, we create, we enable, we maintain and improve the submission tools and processes. And really, it's really important to remember that the e-submissions, even though it might feel very technical, something purely IT, it's not. It's there to support the e-submissions for the core business and for the whole EU network. So the different parts in our very ambitious roadmap that we embarked on in the early 2000s was to include and bring together a coherent journey, as I mentioned earlier. So we have the application forms, we have a channel through which the application form is submitted as a part of the ECTD package. We're then processing and validating that. We have a review tool through which we look at these submissions. Our system send automated notifications to the agency colleagues and to the colleagues in the national competent authorities. We have tools to share the submissions with our assessors and the other regulators, which is this common repository. And I heard Emmanuel talking about some similar ambitions for the African continent. And this has really been one of our main success stories, the fact that we can share the submissions. The applicant sends the submission once to EMA, and then all regulatory agencies within EU are able to access these submissions in one location, download them, keep copies in their own national repositories if they wish, but they can also use these repositories to always go back to the information that has been submitted by the applicants. And of course, then we have something very important, the specification and the guidance. So this is the backbone of everything. So the harmonization, so that throughout the process, the applicant knows how to submit, what are our expectations, what are our validation criteria, and then this will lead to more harmonized approach for all type of procedures, and it leads to less failures. And of course, then that in itself leads into faster evaluation times. And something very important to remember, this was definitely not done overnight. It took a very long time to put in place. It was done incrementally. Even before we had ever heard of an agile methodologies, we were already doing it in a quite agile way. So starting one bit by bit, bringing value to the users, to the whole network, bit by bit, as and when we could reach the next step. And if we drill down to a little bit more, we move to the next slide, and I'll take you to a little time travel. So here, as I mentioned, the e-submissions have really organically grown over nearly 2 decades, and we started from non-ECTDs and submissions on CD and DVD, which replaced these huge pallets of files and papers and folders that were sent to the EMA and to each national competent authority. So we had to start from somewhere. So we started with the implementation of ECTD. And really also within the EU, there was this feeling that, oh, ECTD is very complicated. However, once a nice container, you find everything within that ECTD package. And of course, the lifecycle capabilities of ECTD are really something that makes difference in comparison to non-ECTD electronic formats. So within the EU, for centralized procedure, we mandated ECTD in 2010. So we've had a mandatory use for that already about 13 years. We then, as a next step, launched an e-submission gateway. So before that, the submissions were sent in CDs and DVDs. So we created a gateway through which the submissions can be sent. We implemented the application forms, and then this repository through which we can share all the submissions. And we have a similar repository for safety reports with some enhanced capabilities in there. And we can move to the next slide. So how did we do this successfully? So really one of the key points there is to highlight the benefits to all stakeholders, and especially to the management and those who hold the purse strings, to really to have the understanding that those initial investments lead into major cost savings. So really, you're then able to use those FTEs, those hours that are saved from going through manually paper packages. You can use them to more value-adding activities. And one of the bases, as I mentioned earlier, is really the harmonized requirements where possible. And this will also help to benefit from synergies across the different regulators. Of course, a clear regional specification is a key. It's something that needs to be maintained, but if it's well done, it really helps everybody, not only the applicants, but also regulators. And of course, it's always good to have alongside these regional specifications some practical implementation guides, really a guidance how to do things, but also with that have a good change management and communication strategies in place, so to ensure that you have timely communication to all stakeholders. And what we also find really useful and important is also a channel for the stakeholders to communicate to us as a regulator. So we have user groups, we have webinars, we do publications, but we also have a service desk where we take feedback from the users, be it applicants or another regulator or other users who may have feedback on how we do things. Again, validation rules are something that are really good to have in place because they enable automation and automated rejection, reducing manual workload. And again, if you are moving from non-ECTD to ECTD, it's good to have clear baseline requirements. And one thing that I want to also emphasize is important to have training for the reviewers, especially if you're moving from non-ECTD to ECTD, so that the network is ready with good change management and they know what the expectation is. Then if we move to the next slide, here is just to show our next steps on our path to continuous improvement. So we have adopted an agile methodology, and this helps us to bring value to the stakeholders faster and build value incrementally. Also, similarly, our connection to our SPORE substance product organization and referential program, which has been stepwise, it has enabled and facilitated our move to electronic submissions. And we're, of course, constantly improving and expanding our portals. For example, our Iris portals that have industry and network platforms, and these bring more value and smoother and more coherent user journey for all stakeholders. Then we have recently started launched a first version of our electronic product information with some limited features, but this can be already used in production by early adopters. And of course, just to mention, we always like to use the common standards for interoperability. And that brings my presentation to the end, and I would like to thank you very much for inviting me here today.
Thank you very much for sharing this evolution at EMA and Christina. And we really remember the paper world with these non-simultaneous sharing to all CHMP members, and how the sharing across the network already saved industry days by having this instant portal to receive. We really look forward to discussing these agile approaches in our panel session later on and gain your insights on practical steps that we can take. Thank you so much. Our third presenter is Christina Reinecke. She's the Chief Operating Officer at the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, SAHPRA. And before joining SAHPRA in 2021, Christina spent 13 years in the pharma logistics sector in both quality assurance, regulatory compliance, and logistic operational roles. I'm really excited to hear about the digital transformation ongoing in South Africa. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try and minimize my screen so I can just follow the presentation. So basically, today we would just like to share with you a little bit of what is happening at SAHPRA in terms of our own digital transformation. I will ask the colleagues to move through to the first slide. Thank you so much. So very much for us, as well as a lot of the other regulators on the African continent, I think the digitization and digital transformation of our organizations is quite a significant priority for all of us, because we believe and we know that it will allow us to be more agile, more innovative, and certainly more efficient within the organizations as we then streamline our processes and can then more easily deliver and execute our mandate. So one of the key elements I think I will just highlight is that at the center of our digitization or digital transformation, we have basically a single sign-on self-service customer portal. And this is for primarily the end user to engage with SAHPRA and be, I suppose, the one-stop shop, if you will. With that also having then the internal automated workflows that will allow for information and workflow packages to be moved to different users and different areas within the organization, so that we can reduce the administrative burden within the organization and certainly use the technical resources for delivering then the technical parts of the work. This, of course, then being underpinned by a data analytics tool that will also allow us as the regulator to have real-time reporting. I think this is also the drawback of the old manual systems, is that somebody still had to do data capturing and put all of the information onto a spreadsheet. So even with reporting, it took quite a lot of time and a lot of effort to get that in place. But this is, I think, something that we are really quite excited about, because it also allows us to create then greater transparency within the organization for then not only internal stakeholders in terms of managing the workflows and the deliverables, but also for our external stakeholders to then track applications, understand what the status is of certain work activities within the organization to provide those insights. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just to look at some of the digital transformation challenges, I think a key thing for us in consideration around how we approach this, how we roll out specific tools and what goes first, one of the key elements that we had to consider is the digital execution maturity of the organization. Coming from very much a paper-based organization, very important then that we enable and equip the users within the organization with the right skills, with training, to then also get everybody from a change management perspective at the right level then to accept new software solutions or new ways of working. I was very happy to note in the word cloud earlier that the funding support, financial support, the money around digitization and bringing in digital tools is a key element, and certainly for us something that stuck out. So even with us starting our own journey with digital transformation, I think it really would not have been possible without the support of some of the external funders. And I think specifically I can make mention perhaps then of the support received recently from GIZ and DIT UK that allowed us to put in place some of the tools to kickstart our journey. I think very much for the organization that has such a great need to digitally transform, you are always pulled in various different directions. So I think the one challenge that we have to talk about also is competing priorities. What gets addressed first? Whose systems gets implemented first? So this is also very important in terms of how we then plan the rollout for certain tools to make sure that the value delivery that we envisage kicks in the right place at the right time. And of course, then also very important, also deploying the integrated and interoperable systems that will then support seamless operational processing within the organization. Very important consideration, of course, is just the interoperable standards that we currently work within the health systems network framework. So from a National Department of Health, and I suppose also in future from a ALMA and AMRH perspective, making sure that we all then center and standardize in terms of the digital health standards that we use. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for SAHPRA, again, 4 main strategic goals. And the first one, well, let me rather say, maybe just for context. So SAHPRA as a new entity that came into being at the end of 2019, when the ICT department came into being in 2019, the main focus and certainly the 4 strategic goals that we are still working with is then to establish the IT service and infrastructure. And that moved into a space where we were then looking at creating and implementing ICT network information security framework. And where we are currently now is looking at the digital transformation of the organization and its various business processes. And of course, the main aim, the ultimate strategic goal, of course, is the value delivery. Thank you. Next slide, please. Right. So the actual digital transformation itself, when we started, I think the questions around where do we start, how do we start, very much underpinned by assessing, I think, our own enterprise architecture. So specifically taking the business architecture, what we needed to do was to unpack our strategic goals, create also detailed business process maps. And for this, actually, we've been able to complete 2 reiterations of this particular process so that we have a very clear idea of the business processes. And this informed, of course, by the various role players within the organization, giving us clarity around who the different stakeholders are, what their activities are, the dependencies, the data inputs, output requirements, and of course also the workflow automation that is required to create then operational efficiencies and reduce that administrative burden that I was talking about earlier. We also had to look at the data architecture, so making sure that we understood very clearly what our data assets are, what the data governance elements are that we should have in place or introduce, and also the data flows. As a very key objective for the regulator it is to have real-time interfaces with our National Department of Health and other stakeholders that require certain metadata elements to be exchanged. For instance, in our environment with the National Department of Health, looking at exchanging information around the health product master data. So, I mean, an interesting point that was brought up earlier in terms of this central data repository. So for us, one of the key things that we also now have to look at is to use a common language. So within SAHPRA, between SAHPRA and the National Department of Health, finding then that key denominator at this stage, we are looking at using GTIN from a GS1 standards perspective. Also then reflecting on the applications architecture. So at that point, looking at what applications we had, how scalable they were, and also if they are upgradable. Do they meet currently the organization's requirements, and what about future requirements? So the other element, as we spoke about earlier, is whether or not these applications in fact are interoperable. So whether that's, well, I suppose at all four levels, foundational, structural, semantical, and organizational, but as I said, in South Africa, aligning then with the health standards normative framework, so specifically anchoring our plans and our future developments around the ISO 13606 standard, or even the Health Level 7 standard version 3. Then also the technology architecture. So here specifically for the organization, a very key consideration, because we've got a very small IT team. So in terms of just understanding whether or not we have our own service in place, if we have service on site, if we do self-hosting, in other words, if we have strategic outsource of the hosting, what does the networks look like, the storage and the software and the hardware components. And this, as I said, done quite early on in 2019. So part of that also then was the reflection on the security architecture, making sure that we then have the various policies, procedures, and elements around access control, ID management, data encryption, and very important, and I think it becomes increasingly important as we continue to digitally transform the organization, the focus on threat detection and threat management. Next slide, please. This is just a very high level overview of our roadmap as a starting point in 2019 and hopefully with a vision to 2025 as it stands at the moment. So as I said, in 2019, very much focused on the network infrastructure, the connectivity, the VoIP, and at that stage we had our first digital applications portal for DVP. We also then had this kickoff of ECTD applications, and those at that stage from 2018 to 2017, 2018, when the communication around the ECTD transition was communicated, taking those applications in, as we've heard from the colleague from EMA, at that stage it came through via USB. And then, of course, we all had a massive surprise in 2020 where we couldn't go to the office and receive USBs with ECTD applications on them. And we very rapidly had to move to receive those ECTD applications via SFTP submission process. So those ECTD applications then managed within our evaluator tool. So also, as mentioned earlier, the benefit of having the validation of the ECTD submission, if there are areas that we can deal with it quite quickly to make the process very efficient. And thereafter it gets pulled into with batch processing into our evaluator tool. So 2021 largely focused on... Yes, apologies.
No worries. I've been put on the screen to mention that we should quickly wrap up, but I see we're really towards the end of your roadmap. So thanks, Christina.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, yeah, also with the, I suppose further activities, it was also just to have the specifications around RIMS, We had a further portal that was put in place for Section 21 applications. And from last year to, I suppose, also the activities in the future, a lot has to do around implementing some of the smaller digital tools. And then the larger projects for us that we are focusing on for the remainder of this year and next year will be dealing with the regulatory information management system that deals with the case management, document management, lifecycle management of our health product submissions, as well as then again the evaluation. I think with the next 2 or 3 slides, and of course the slides can be shared afterwards, it was basically just to highlight in terms of the regulatory information management ecosystem, what some of these tools look like and specifically what they intend to be doing. So the self-service stakeholder portal, the health product IMS. On the next slide, I think we have very exciting, the clinical trials management tool that will be going live now in November. Also the import-export permit management tool, courtesy of UNODC. And I think the last slide, yes, just the greater pharmacovigilance ecosystem. So initial support through AU3S Med Safety for the self-reporting, but now adding the other 3 components to that. And this is a project that we are working with the colleagues from MHRA. And then, yeah, the main thing, basically, the data warehouse. Certainly, I think if our pockets were deep enough, we'd like to start it with a data lake. In the sense that a lot of the data that we have at the moment is not very structured. So I think it would have been beneficial, but this project, I think we will take in a very slow and staggered approach to make sure that we then do the design and we get this quite spot on so that we can have the benefit of the data analytics. I think that was the last slide, Teresa. Yes.
Thank you
yes,
so
yes.
much, Christiane. I really, really appreciate it. And lots of work there and key challenges that we can now move on to the panel discussion to delve in further. So thank you so much. And with that, I would like to ask the speakers from the presentations to stay on the call. Thank you so much. And in addition, I'd like to invite 2 industry speakers, Tim Powell, who's the Director of Submission Sciences in Biogen and the Chair of the FPA ECTD Working Group, and Karim Kashimi, the Regulatory Affairs Manager in Merck Group, and also the Chair of the Algeria Industry Association Regulatory Workstream Group. Very well welcome to you both, and thanks for joining us on this panel discussion. So we will, again, reminder, please post your questions that we will try to address as much as possible towards the end of the session. Thank you, everyone. So if I can just delve into the benefits one more time of going into digital solutions and this incremental approach. Karim, if I can hand over to you from the industry perspective, really seeing how do we see digitalization as being an enabler for the catalyst or a catalyst to shorten time to market? Thank you, Karim.
Thank you, Teresa. So digitalization can help facilitate and accelerate access to data and its assessment with higher speed and efficiency, which allows an optimal collaboration, leading to faster decision-making. Creates harmonization through alignment with ICH standard and for ECTD, create efficiencies with initial dossier submission, minimization of burden, automated receipt, and technical validation of dossier submissions, creates efficiencies with dossier assessment, immediate availability of dossier for inspection, evaluation, navigation improvement within and across dossiers, accelerates collaboration among assessors and among health authorities, creates efficiency with dossier lifecycle management, updating of submission simplified, utilization of existing document among submission possible, ready access to historical information, simplified support for different doses and form of a product, creates connection between systems, pharmacovigilance, submission platform, and a holistic regulatory oversight. These improvements in turn allow for more comprehensive reviews, a more efficient and effective review process, facilitate reliance, which in turn benefits patient access.
Thank you so much, Karim, for that comprehensive answer. Tim, you have a lot of experience in working with agencies on harmonizing regulatory standards and implementation of ECTD over the years. I'd like to see if you wanted to complement or expand on Karim's thoughts on how ECTD specifically can benefit regulators and industry in Africa. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa, and hi, everybody. Yeah, so many things to say, but I'll keep it short. There's an abundance of benefits. So thinking from a regulator perspective, we always kind of position it that moving to ECTD is it really could be a key step in the transition to more digital ways of working. It can reduce the manual paper handling burden. If moving from paper, it could facilitate the ability to automate various activities, even simple things like the ECTD validation and automating a submission receipt through a portal and things like that. It takes a lot of the manual work out. Once you have those standards in place, the technology can manage all those things for you. Also, having more metadata about each submission or procedure, then that gives more options to how to use that data meaningfully. You can sort of streamline other processes within an agency. It could also be a key factor for collaboration between assessors. So you could think about, collaborative reviews with, ability for each assessor to put comments on documents or, point another assessor in a certain direction. And also then thinking broader collaborations between agencies and across regions, scenarios like the ECOWAS or the African Medicines Agency that, you could have a sort of a harmonized review and a simple visibility of review comments and things between agencies. So, from an industry perspective, obviously, moving to this format, it's going to really improve information management with that switch to electronic ways of working. Just simple things like searching and cross-referencing between documents become possible and simple. And overall, really, that ECTD lifecycle concept allows for quick and easy access to all of the previously submitted information. You don't have to kind of go digging through a storeroom or going, searching back through previous documents. So I think it can really, really help. And obviously, we always advocate for the alignment with the ICH standards. That goes down to the CTD, having documents structured in the right way, and then ECTD as the format for those. And that reuse then country to country and region to region again reduces manual effort and can accelerate the time to market and things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for your comprehensive answer. And on that note, I did want to go back to something, Christina, you mentioned during your presentation on competing priorities. And so how does SAPRA prioritize which digital initiatives to invest in? We saw the great roadmap, but how would you prioritize which digital initiatives to tackle the next 1 to 2 years? Thanks, Christina.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, I think for us, the key consideration was just, and very much actually it was driven by, I suppose, the outcome of the audit report and also understanding what the users are struggling with the most. And that for us was to create a traceable system to receive applications, make sure that we can share the applications and the information around the applications with the different users in a very seamless way, because we are, as many regulators on the continent, resource constrained. So when we focused on implementation, it was to make sure that we create the most value for our users and our stakeholders with implementing then the systems that we could roll out in a staged or staggered way, depending on the pace of the adoption as well. Hopefully we can speed up some of these over the next 6 to 12 months. But it is at the end of the day to make sure that the organization can receive the applications, engage with our stakeholders through the stakeholder portal, and then manage the documentation. And I think a key thing also mentioned by Christina is the lifecycle management aspect. This has been, I think, quite problematic for us in the past due to the number of amendments that come in. So just from a transactional perspective, that number of transactions was really critical for us to digitize that process quite quickly. So yeah, I think that informed the decision around which systems and in what sequence we wanted to start deploying them.
Thank you so much for that. Now, if I may just delve into the challenges a little bit as well, because we saw in the word cloud as well, quite a few challenges popping up. And maybe if I may go to Christina, you know, you have been on this journey for the EMA for quite some time. And the challenges that you see are not unique, right? They're also experienced at the EMA side. And I wondered whether you could shed some light on how you overcame some of these challenges that you faced during the implementation of some of the e-submission systems in order for the African Medicines Agency to avoid some of the same pitfalls. Thank you, Christina.
Of course, thank you. So as I said, our journey has really been a long journey, and it has been very incremental journey. Of course, partly because the technology wasn't as developed in early 2000s as it's now. So if we started from scratch now in Africa, you may have that opportunity because you're not it's not 20 years ago. So there is technology has advanced so much that it enables much more for perhaps a lot less effort. But I think it's really important to kind of map where you want to go and see what are the main benefits so that you can bring them aside. You could think we started with ECTD format. Perhaps we could have started with the channel, how the submissions are sent, to make that electronic before we started to mandate ECTD. Format is hugely important and the harmonization helps, but if you are still receiving CDs, DVDs, that still requires quite a lot of manual work. So the digital channel to get the submissions in is really a key. Luckily, we had mandated all that before the pandemic came and before the agency moved from the UK to the Netherlands because of Brexit. Because if we hadn't been fully electronic at that point, it would have been a bit of a disaster. A bit like Christina said, you woke up one day and realized you can't get to the agency to those USB sticks. So I think the digital channel is really, really important. And then once that's established, of course, again, the sharing of those digitally submitted submissions with your network is hugely important. So there comes the common repository. Then when you have the package there electronically, then you can start implementing formats. Like now we're embarking this road to implement ECTD version 4, but it is incremental. It's going to take time again, but because we are already electronic, then you can enhance and improve what you have. Again, we're improving our electronic application forms. We're digitalizing them so that we can better reuse the data that is submitted to us in those forms, and we can edit it, push to the systems, and then that in its turn leads into better quality of data overall in the system. And every enhancement then kind of increases this automations and efficiency and allows the resources to be used more value-adding activities.
Thank you so much for that insightful reply, Christina. And I hope we can really think about some of these points that you made to support the African Medicines Agency. Tim, if I may hand over to you, how can industry play a role? I know we worked in the FPA ECTD working group with lots of authorities. How can industry really play a role in supporting Africa to address some of these challenges? Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. And you're right. We do a lot of advocacy and speaking with different regulators who are considering moving into a digital way of working and adopting ECTD. I think one of the essentials is collaboration between industry and regulators and other stakeholders. It's really essential to the long-term success for implementing either new technical standards or harmonizing requirements across African member states. So that ability to have that open communication and frequent communication allows for adjustments to requirements to be made and avoids showstoppers. We have seen in a few other regions where there wasn't that ability to communicate, and then there may be something in the technical requirements that was actually preventing us from submitting something or preventing us from having a valid submission. So it's really essential that we can all the stakeholders can communicate effectively. And a great example in Europe, we've had, with partnering with Christina and others from EMA, sort of various working groups that meet either weekly or monthly, where technical experts have been able to advise on new standards. We can support regulators by kind of performing testing or UAT on new systems, or just giving general feedback on how things are working and where we see the pain points, if we're the ones that are kind of producing things with those systems, and even things like drafting new or updated technical documentation like ECTD specifications or implementation guides. I think whilst those things are in the draft stage, we can really work together and kind of share expertise and knowledge to make sure that once these things go live or once a new process launches, that it will be a success. So that's my key, is really just have that open communication and dialogue. And for any industry colleagues on this call today, really, do volunteer and do participate and do get involved wherever you can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim. And this brings me nicely to Emmanuel, but I see, Christian, that you have your hand raised, so maybe I'll address your comment first. Go ahead, Christina.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, I think I just wanted to tack on what Tim was saying. So one thing for us that was also quite important was to understand whether or not we would go for an off-the-shelf solution or a custom developed solution. And I think just with regards the maturity of the processes and the understanding of the relevant people in the organization to build custom systems, you have to be very, very clear around what you want it to look like, what you want it to do. Otherwise, it's just pouring money down the drain, right? But I think a challenge for us in terms of accessing off-the-shelf systems to then enable us to go through a learning phase and also understand exactly what it is that we need, what works, what doesn't work, in order for us to have a long-term view to then custom develop something, is price point. Price point of a lot of these solutions, I think, is largely problematic for a lot of the African regulators. And that probably I would like to appeal to the various industry colleagues to say, well, is there something that can be done for enabling access to some of these off-the-shelf solutions to kickstart the process of digital transformation for a lot of the regulators? Custom developments take a lot of time, a lot of input, a lot of resource, a lot of skilled understanding of what that solution needs to look like. And a faster way to get you to play in the game, basically, is to access then off-the-shelf solutions, but at a cost that we can afford to actually start implementing those. So yeah, I think I would maybe just leave that little nugget on and leave it in the room for people to ruminate over. Thanks.
And a super important nugget. Thank you, Christina. Let's really take this forward and into our conclusion as well. Really appreciate it. Emmanuel, I wanted to hand over to you I know that ECOWAS is really working on ECTD implementation, and I wonder whether you could share with us what are some of the very next steps for the awareness journey, and this is also for everyone listening, and how we can also support some of these upcoming implementation awareness sessions. Over to you, Emmanuel.
All right, thank you, Teresa. So currently, I know ECOWAS has completed the specification for ECTD and e-submission, and also validated by all the 15 member states, regulators and IT experts. And this happened just last month, in August in Accra. And also currently the ECTD portal has been developed. And so with the next steps, I know they are to conduct industry launch by October, that is 2023. And also from there, the portal will be pilot for 1 year, where they will give room for questions and answers, and with the question and answers, they will based on the question and answers to improve the system. So currently, this is what is happening at ECOWAS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And I hope then there's also a chance for industry to be involved in these pilots, and really looking forward to these developments. We were all very curious about what's happening with ECOWAS and ECTD, so thank you for that. Now, if I may hand over to you, Karim, to think about, to maybe share with us the North Africa region. We know there's a lot of effort ongoing in North Africa at the moment to implement regulatory digital solutions and ECTD as well. What would you consider as critical success factors for the region? Thank you, Karim.
Thank you, Teresa, for this question. For a successful adoption of ECTD, there are a number of critical success factors that need to be considered. First, timeline need to allow sufficient time for each state of ECTD adoption. A pilot phase is helpful for stakeholders to participate and provide lessons learned before the tool become implemented and effective. There needs to be a clear, transparent roadmap available for all partners that is carefully planned and aligned. Early vendor engagement is critical, with timely and frequent communication as to required specification and dynamic problem solving. All stakeholders, including industry, local or big pharma, should be involved from initial phases to ensure adoption. Partnership among regulator and between health authorities and industry has proven to be helpful early in the adoption process in order to leverage experience of other health authorities and industry, advice, testing, pilots, and discussion. South Africa already adopted ECTD and has shared its experience. Tunisia started its journey to implement ECTD. Egypt, as a full member of ICH, and Algeria, as an observer member of ICH, could pave the way for adoption of the ICH M8 recommendation. Morocco started this year a pilot phase for implementation of a digital solution.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Karim, for the updates as well, and fully aligned with you on this. Thank you. Now, I'd like to reach the conclusion of the panel session by giving you really the opportunity, everyone in the panel, to have a rapid fire answer. I'm really thinking here about the opportunity for call to action. And I already heard some of them mentioned before, but this is a chance for you to give your view, both at the national, regional, continental level, one call of action for the audience to take away to unify these efforts. So maybe I'll volunteer. Emmanuel, I'll volunteer you. Please go ahead.
All right.
How can we help?
Thank you, Teresa. Okay, so well, thank you for this platform. So I'm using this platform to ask all partners, manufacturers, stakeholders to please come on board and support the AMRH IMSTC initiatives. I believe this initiative, these initiatives will help the continent, and I'm asking all to come on board to please help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to give one call of action for the audience or for yourselves?
Teresa, yeah, I think maybe again I'll just add. I think it's important that the solutions that is available for the regulators to access, perhaps if a good look can be given to pricing, but also for different regulators to share information around the relevant initiatives that they are busy with, what they're doing. And I think also in developing, if we are doing custom developments, perhaps then to consider scalability of the solutions to such an extent that it could be made available either in the regional economic center or even made available for adoption by other regulators on the continent. So I think, again, maybe just that eye on harmonizing and supporting one another with whatever initiatives we've got going. Sounds like there's been a lot of learning across different organizations. And I think if more and more opportunities could be created for us to share information and do a little bit more show and tell, I think that would be quite helpful to show people actually what we've been doing and what the different system solutions can do and can offer them. I think that would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christina. If there's no one else that would like to offer any last call of action, not to worry, we will actually have this also in our conclusion statements as well, and really seeing how we can take this forward. I really want to thank all of you panelists for being there today, really present, and for your unique perspectives on regulatory digitalization at the local, national, continental, and global level in a very collaborative manner. This concludes now our panel discussion, and I see that we already have quite a few questions in the chat. So if we don't mind, we can stay on in this format here with all of your visible faces here so that we can get to the questions, and then I can see also who would like to address them. So also, audience, you have the chance to upvote or to like the questions of others, so that this also helps us in seeing what are the most pertinent questions that we can answer. So perhaps I'll start with one that I see has quite a few likes. For the health authorities present, could you please provide advice to other regulators on where to begin with digitalization? And what are the success factors and traps to avoid? So I think we covered some of this during the panel discussion, but perhaps, yeah, just a few words from any of you on, yeah, how to start.
Well, maybe I can start just very quickly. Something that can be quite, let's say, low cost is harmonization. Bit what Tim mentioned, what we do in EU. So we have forums, we have groups where we work together, industry and the regulators as a group, really drafting guidance and harmonized specifications. And then, of course, thinking when you start implementing a system, what is the thing that will bring you the most advantage? As I mentioned, one of my responses earlier was maybe the channel to submit digitally can bring really a good benefit and speed it all up. And then you can, when you have those channels, then you can improve, and then you can mandate formats, and then you can improve content of the dossier. But once you can get it in quickly, then everybody has access to those informations.
Thank you so much, Christina. Perhaps I can go to the next question here that I see has quite a few likes. Are African agencies willing to accept the most updated versions of dossiers to start off the digitalization process for already marketed products, with or without post-approval commitments under evaluation? This is really, I guess, a question for regulators. And I see here, I guess it would mean, I think this probably refers also to baselining, right? So if we think about starting off a digital process, let's say ECTD, are African agencies willing to take the most updated dossier? I think this is how I'm reading it. Would anyone like to tackle that question?
So I'm not exactly clear on the question, but I think just from our perspective, basically how it works at the moment with the ECTDs is that we would then request that they submit to us the most up-to-date version of the dossier in ECTD format as the baseline submission, and then afterwards it's quite easy then to manage the life cycle and the additional variations or amendments actually that come in. So even for some of the products, as we now going through our health product registration renewals process, one of the requirements are for all the products that is being renewed, that the baseline submission and then the subsequent sequence, which is then the variation IA, the renewal actually comes in. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think the answer is yes. It is the most up-to-date version of the dossier that we do want to take in. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kristelna. And I want to give I want to honor the first question that was actually put in the chat very earlier on. And this is for you, Christina, and that is, what are some of the lessons learned from the development and implementation of EMA's digital harmonization? What might you have done differently?
Good question.
Thank you, Christina.
It's a long time since we started. I suppose we kind of had this strategy, but I think it was very much driven by small groups. So we didn't have maybe such a good adoption on our kind of like a management level and how to go forward. So there was always so many competing things, so many different competing initiatives, that maybe we should have somehow sold it better. And that's one of the things that I mentioned there earlier, that it's important that it's adopted also by the management, that you have sufficient funding so that you can move forward with these initiatives, and so that you can justify that there really are savings after the initial kind of cost, so that it really is worth of doing the adoption, because you can then use these resources in so much better way, rather than moving physical files from location to another, or having to travel perhaps several hours to a physical location to access documents. So there are better ways of doing things. So I think it really needs to be adopted, that this is the way we want to do things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Christina. I actually have a question here for you, Karim, on the call. And it's about Morocco's digital portal. Do we have can you share any more insight on this solution that was piloted in Morocco? And are there any links that we could provide post-conference about the registration portal? Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. So Moroccan Health Authority engaged in a pilot phase this year to go digital with a new platform. They would like to digitalize all of their activities. Link could be shared after the conference.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I believe we have probably time for one last question. So I'm going to see whether there is one that's been upvoted. And I see, Christina, thank you so much for answering some that are specifically for SAPRA. Really appreciate it. Yeah, let's see. What are the most appropriate timelines for health authorities to implement the ECTD? And Tim, I actually wanted to hand this over to you, because there is a ECTD best practice FPIA white paper that's out there, publicly available. And maybe we can also provide this as a link post-conference. But perhaps you could just quickly answer this question. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Teresa. And yeah, I mean, it varies obviously, but it typically, even doing it very rapidly, from right at the beginning to sort of drafting technical documentation all the way through to go live, would be minimum 12 months, really, is what that would be a very quick turnaround, because there's lots of different stakeholders involved, and it involves software vendors actually updating their tools so that you can create ECTD based on that new specification. Then there's all of the industry has to update their tools and things. So yeah, we when COVID hit, we did have questions from some regulators thinking, oh, could we switch to ECTD in a month or 2 months? And it's really does take longer than that, but it's a journey well worth pursuing for all the benefits that we've covered.
Thank you so much, Tim. And perhaps if you have the possibility to put the link in the question and answer to this best practice FPIA paper, that would be fantastic. But if not, no worries, we can send this after the session. Thank you so much. So with that, I think the timer is clear, that we're at the end of our question and answer session. Thank you all so much for providing really great questions for our panelists. And I will now reach the final step of our session. So I'll cover some really high-level key takeaways from today's session. And I think what we've seen, and I can really speak to all the presenters today, with the great progress that they've shared with us, is that we're really underway in Africa with digitalization activities and the advancement, actually, in the deployment of ECTD. It was actually mentioned in the word cloud, and I was glad it was there, but no reinventing the wheel. We really have a lot of best practices gained over a decade, especially with South Africa's ECTD implementation. And so I think the chance here really is to broaden the best practices across the continent, and actively supporting AMRH's endeavors for the centralized regulatory systems and ECTD throughout the African Medicines Agency. So no reinventing the wheel was a key takeaway. Avoid putting the digital cart before the digital horse. And what we mean by that is a steady, stepwise approach that is sustainable on this digitalization journey is really the key, the way to go. And that a lot of these foundational steps that we seemingly daunting, but we heard today from our presenters are actually not that difficult to implement, are critical for the African Medicines Agency to participate in that future state that I mentioned as well. And there's an opportunity for the African Medicines Agency to leapfrog. So Christina mentioned it earlier, you know, she had gone through the pains of years and years of inadequate technology. And now we're really at the stage where we can think about the most modern solutions. And also to Christelna's point, maybe there's a chance to think about some pilots with new off-the-shelf technology without every national agency having to come up with their own custom solutions. Collaboration. This brings me nicely to the point on collaboration on the roadmap priorities and how industry here is really committed to partner in digitalization roadmap with African Medicines Agency. And we also call on agencies, stakeholders, everyone here participating on the call today to really work together towards the establishment of this African Medicines Agency roadmap for digitalization. And this can be done through forums, pilots. Let's really take this discussion further. And finally, no two-step Africa. I think it's really important that the African Medicine Agency can connect all stakeholders. And we heard from Emmanuel of this fantastic effort done to really outreach and look at all the different efforts in every agency. And really, this is a chance to connect the stakeholders in the continent and regulatory ecosystem layers. We need a strong, interoperable digital health infrastructure, which really has then the potential to help close the disparities in access to care and help the countries to achieve their universal health coverage goals. So with that, I do think we have 1 more minute left. If we can ask everyone in the audience to leave this event feeling activated and think of action plans next. We have a Mentimeter poll if there's a chance to bring it up again. And everyone to get their phones out 1 more time. And if this is still possible, fantastic. I think I see it popping up. So brilliant. So we have another question for you. It's a survey. And here we really want to see your views on what do you see as key priorities for the digitalization roadmap over the next 1 to 2 years for the African Medicines Agency. So please vote. There's some options here, really thinking about promoting information sharing, collaboration, adopting harmonization. Fantastic. I start to see the answers here. Political will and commitment. We talked about at the beginning in the word cloud funding, building and sustaining capacity. Fantastic. So I see that the answers are still coming in. Brilliant. So in the interests of time, I'll let this wheel go on for just 1 more second, a couple more seconds, because it's really interesting insights we're getting here. Fantastic. I'm going to stop here. I really see adopting and harmonizing regulatory and legal provisions to allow for the use of digital innovations as being top of mind for the audience here today. And this is really key, right, in being able to deliver some of the first steps of digitizing as well, some of the document-based and legal e-signatures, et cetera. So with that, I would like to now close our exciting discussion today on digitalization. And I hope this really left you with some food for thought and you're ready to activate and help step in on the next steps for digitalization in Africa. Thank you so much. And we will now go to a virtual coffee tea break. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Nick. I will take advantage of the coffee break to test your audio.
Okay, Anna Maria, can you hear me fine?
I can hear you very well. Thank you very much.
And I can hear you fine. Good.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We will
You're
see you in a
welcome.
short while.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Hi, welcome. Welcome to the second session of today's discussions on the Africa Regulatory Conference. My name is Jenny Beeks-Reed. I head the Global Regulatory Policy and Intelligence Group at Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and I'm the chair of the Regulatory Science Committee at IFPMA. It's my pleasure to moderate this session. We're going to be talking about regulatory agilities and flexibilities employed during the pandemic in an effort to look at how we can improve some of the regulatory systems so that we can adapt to new innovative approaches and change that addresses those and helps to facilitate those. And what I mean by regulatory flexibilities are things like, use of electronic documents or e-consent or different methods that the regulators allowed industry to use so that we could get clinical trials up and running, continuing during the pandemic. So what we want to do now is look at the experience we had, some of the lessons we learned, and where we would like to continue employing those flexibilities in the future. And if we can go to the next slide, I think we're going to have we have a Mentimeter poll here. And what you're going to see when you scan on the QR code is a list of regulatory flexibilities, just some of them. There were a lot, but that you may be interested in seeing. What we'd like you to do is select from that list the top 3 that you may be interested in seeing employed as a future state as we continue to improve our regulatory systems and processes and industry's adaptation to those, so that we can, all in the name of getting products to patients more efficiently, effectively, and of course safely. We're going to go back to the results of that survey later in the Q&A session, so you have time to do that, but I just wanted to flag that for you now. And what we want to do is hear from some of the key stakeholders that lived during this time. Hear from some of those, like I mentioned, lessons learned, and their thoughts about future incorporation and kind of in the steady state of clinical trials, because we know a lot of regulators are continuing to think about what do we want to adapt and incorporate into our regulatory guide. And with an eye toward thinking about what would those important steps be to facilitate that incorporation into regulations and guidances, and to adapt our processes going forward. You'll see, of course, on the website, biographies, et cetera, of speakers, so I won't go through all that now. But I want to start with, we'll have 2 speaker presentations. One from industry that will represent kind of some of the lessons learned, what we experienced during that time, we're interested in, and future adoption, like I said, of some of these flexibilities. And then, very importantly, of course, from national regulatory authority about the experience and their thoughts about future adoption of some of these steps. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker from industry. And thank you. And Jacqueline, if I can turn the floor over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ginny. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are dialing in from. I work with the Global Regulatory Affairs Division of Johnson & Johnson, providing regulatory strategy support for our global public health organization. And I'm making this presentation, like Ginny said, on behalf of the IFPMA. In the next few minutes, I would be setting the scene for a broader discussion around the ability of regulatory systems to incorporate innovation and change. And for the purpose of this exercise, I'll be using regulatory agilities that were experienced by industry in Africa during the COVID-19 pandemic as a case study. As we know, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted medicinal product development, production, regulation, and distribution. As such, there was a lot of pressure on stakeholders to develop COVID-19 products whilst ensuring patients access to other medicines. Now, this led to national regulatory authorities and the biopharmaceutical industry employing product development and regulatory agilities to accelerate development and, of course, authorization of safe, effective COVID-19 vaccines, but not only that, treatments and then other medicines as well. Next slide, please. And this presentation generally gives an overview of an IFPMA project that is based on literature review, as well as interviews that were conducted with member associations in various regions. The objective was to look at how we can be prepared for future pandemics, and also delve into any best practices resulting from the pandemic that could be used in the normal regulatory setting, as well as provide a regulatory basis to help streamline regulatory processes and reduce duplication. So while the research had a global scope of focus, for the purposes of this conference, my focus will be on Africa. Next slide, please. So from the survey that was conducted, as well as the interviews that were done, the analyzed reported experiences related to agilities were categorized into 3 groups, namely regulatory assessment or processes, manufacturing or quality oversight, and then product development or clinical trials. Now, as regards regulatory assessment and processes, we realized that there was a virtualization and digitalization of work practices, such as use of electronic signatures and e-documents, i.e. eGMP certificates, ECPPs, etc. There was also a lot of remote working for qualified persons, of course, to increase efficiency and facilitate continuity during the heat of the pandemic. Also, there was the use of risk-based approaches in decision-making for rapid authorization of medicinal products, including COVID-19 vaccines. Again, we saw the use of rolling submissions and reviews for exceptional authorization, as well as other approaches that were put in place by different NRAs. Now, when it came to post-approval changes, we did see some agilities applied to PACs, including approvals with incomplete data in some cases, expedited procedures for extensions and postponements. Also, what we saw was a DEX-based GMP assessment was conducted in some cases, eliminating the need for on-site GMP inspections. And then generally also, there was increased collaboration. There was a lot of collaboration in WHO, ABRF, and then the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, ICMA, played a significant role in facilitating international collaboration and regulatory harmonization. Next slide, please. So as you can see, so many agilities were implemented to ensure continuity. But of course, as with any human institution or system, these were not without challenges. Whereas digital tools were utilized significantly, virtual meetings were not always possible. And because some countries either had non-existent or limited digital infrastructure. And in the session prior to this, I believe that Emmanuel from the Ghana FDA highlighted the limited digital infrastructure in a lot of countries on the continent. In some cases, submissions had to be done via hard copy and physically rather than via e-submission. There was also generally fragmented regulatory systems across the continent with no framework for the use of reliance in many instances, or in the case where a framework existed, reliance was also used ineffectively. Also, there was a requirement for legalization of documents in some cases, which of course defeated the purpose behind the use of e-documents in the first place. Next slide, please. Now, having said all these, what would we then say is the way forward? What industry would like to suggest is that there should be increased digitalization and use of electronic tools, but more importantly, there should be interoperability. Because of course, it's nice for everyone to put in their own systems, but if the systems are not talking to each other, then there isn't much usefulness of these systems between 2 or more countries. There needs to be interoperability across systems to ensure the full benefit of digital infrastructure for countries. And again, I'm glad that Emmanuel talked about the information sharing portal via the AMMRH platform, and also looking into a model system where information exchange can occur. And I can say that this is a step in the right direction. The use of e-documents such as ECPPs, eGMP certificates, etc., should also be institutionalized. For us as industry, we guarantee that the documents, the e-documents submitted are genuine, and legalization is unnecessary as it takes a lot of time and also erodes the benefits of e-submission. EMA, for instance, has a verification system. So if in doubt about the authenticity of a particular e-document provided, a risk-based verification could be done on the EMA website. There should also be increased use of reliance to gain efficiencies and avoid redundancies. And again, NRAs need to set up a national step for all the procedures with the same administrative step and timeline for any type of collaborative or facilitated registration procedure. I believe that this is a point that has come up, a recurring theme in most of the sessions about the need for a national, the incorporation of the national step into national procedures. Also, there should be promotion of transparency and responsible data sharing amongst NRAs, as well as an avenue for experienced NRAs to share best practices. Then again, when it comes to clinical trials, what we'd like to say, whereas we didn't really experience a lot of agilities in that area, the future of clinical trials is decentralized clinical trials. And in Europe, the US and other jurisdictions, this is being utilized, enabling remote monitoring, as well as direct-to-patient delivery of investigational products. So what it means is that patients can actually stay where they are. The trial comes to them instead of they going to a hospital to participate in the trial. And there's a lot of remote monitoring that fits also more in the African setting where there's limited infrastructure and clinical sites. So in the clinical research session, we did learn that a lot of capacity building is ongoing. And indeed, clinical research in Africa is going to grow because, especially also because of diversity considerations. And to be sure that Africa is part of global studies, innovations like decentralized clinical trials is a way to get Africa engaged right from the onset. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, whether it's to prepare for the next pandemic or to strengthen their standard normative processes, NRA should consider feeding all the above recommendations into their future strategic plans, focusing on increased collaboration, reliance, and harmonization. Also, without belaboring the point, the use of digital tools and risk-based approaches in decision-making is encouraged, especially to gain efficiencies and make the various NRA procedures more predictable. The other thing we'd like to highlight is that prioritization of post-approval changes should be with the same agency with which new products are approved, especially to ensure supply continuity. Thank you so much for the time, and over to you, Ginny.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation and great overview and highlighting some of the specific issues and more to address. And so with that, I'd like to welcome our next speaker. And what we're going to hear about is, the experience from, FDA Ghana that Edwin will present for us. If you can take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share some experiences with colleagues. Next slide, please. Well, my name is Edwin Nkansa. I am with the Food and Drugs Authority. I am the head of the Vaccines Vigilance and Clinical Trials Directorate. So once again, thank you very much. FDA, the Food and Drugs Authority, is a national regulatory authority with a responsibility by law to regulate health products and technologies, including post-authorization safety monitoring of regulated products, and also with the responsibility for clinical trials oversight. Of course, the FDA has successfully applied some regulatory agility. I would think I will concentrate here under the marketing authorization function, the clinical trials function, and then the safety monitoring of pharmacovigilance function. And of course, the application of these agilities were geared towards ensuring rapid access to safe and effective health products and towards the comeback of the pandemic. And of course, some of these applications have been moved on so that routinely these applications, agilities will be applied to products submitted. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, so I'll zoom into what we have done under the clinical trials oversight function. Of course, we've during the pandemic, we were able to revise our timelines to expeditiously work on applications, and we revised them from the 60 days routine timelines to the 21 days. And this was purely done to expedite evaluation and decision-making on submitted applications. Of course, to a certain point, we have to revise them down to 15 working days in line with the average timelines for evaluating applications. The next one is the reliance, actively applying the reliance policy we have. And this policy has been in existence for the past 4 years. In past, it was there post pre-pandemic. And then what we do, we wholly or partly rely on the decision made by agencies or regional bodies we classify as well-resourced NRAs. And in sense, we leverage decision made by such authorities to arrive at a decision at the FDA. We actively also applied virtual trainings. You know, FDA has this extensive training mandate as part of our corporate objectives or corporate vision. We want to become a training hub for our sub-region. So we extensively work towards ensuring that the regulators, in-house regulators within the subcontinent, and also our clients are actually trained to effectively execute their mandate. So we extensively use virtual trainings, especially we have this annual GCP training, which used to be in person, but of course we've moved it to virtual, and then we've increased participation, and the ease of participation has extensively been increased, and so the numbers it has reflected in the numbers of participants. The next one being concurrent submission of CTA, and that is the clinical trials application and ethics applications submitted to the ethics committees or institutional review boards. We encourage that it should be submitted at the same time so that processing of such applications will be done in parallel. So that in time past, it used to be submission at the FDA, and upon submission at the ethics committee, and then when that approval is secured, then you submit at the FDA. But now we have agreed for concurrent submission, parallel evaluation, so that decisions can be arrived quite on time. And we also applied agility to clinical trials during the pandemic. That would not have been really favorably considered, but during the pandemic, we were able to review a submission and then actually granted approval for the conduct of a clinical trial for a particular product, which was in the system already, that had been granted marketing authorization for the management of malaria. So that was granted to evaluate the effectiveness of that particular product in the management of COVID-19. I think the last one, which is not actually showing on this slide, is adoption of adaptive trials, which is something we have embraced quite well. And then we have actually approved a couple of trials, and then some are still ongoing. Some have actually ended. Next slide, please. Under the marketing authorization arm, again, reliance has been something we have extensively used to grant authorization to a couple of products, and which we intend pursuing. And then one critical component we have also added to our work in time past, after following evaluation of a particular submitted application, each and every query was classified as critical. So the applicant or the manufacturer will have to resolve that particular query or give us a proper satisfactory response to that query before an approval will be granted. During the pandemic, we were able to classify queries into critical and then major. Critical being requirements shall be satisfactorily addressed before authorization shall be granted, and then the major requirement shall be satisfactorily addressed during the period of the authorization. So these are things that we intend moving forward and then apply routinely to promote access to life-saving medicines. Again, there was a dedicated team in time past. If submissions were dealt with by competencies situated in respective departments. Now the authority has come up with a team of experts, in-house experts who are called upon as and when it is necessary, when a product is deemed of major public health concern, such as the malaria vaccine. This team happens to be the team that handled the COVID-19 applications, now such as the malaria vaccine, which was recently approved by Ghana, the R21. This particular team had to be assembled to extensively work on it within specified limited time to come up with a decision on such applications. Next slide, please. Virtual dossier evaluations are something we have also embraced. It used to be in-person dossier evaluation meetings. Of course, what we do is that when we receive an application, the whole team of experts come together in a room, on a big conference room, and then we sit and then evaluate dossiers, give us the opportunity to interact and discuss and then make decisions whilst we do the evaluations. But now we've moved on to virtual dossier evaluation settings. We are able to do that online as a team to work and get dossiers evaluated effectively. And that we intend pursuing after the pandemic. The conditional authorization is something that we used to do that before the pandemic, and I think during the pandemic it was extensively applied, and we will continue applying conditional authorization. The validity of authorizations are mostly 3 years, and the conditional authorization we give 1 year, and then when the applicant is able to fully satisfy the conditions stated within the authorization letter, we extend it by an additional 2 years. And basically we do that when the situation when we notice that the submitted dossier substantially the benefits outweighs the risk related to the volume of dossier or data that has been submitted. Then we come in and grant conditional authorization. Of course, one must note that in applying these agilities, we have an eye out for the safety and efficacy of such particular product vis-a-vis the need for access to these life-saving medications. As a result, we also almost always accompany such authorizations with rigorous post-market surveillance commitments and activity to ensure that any safety issues which comes up as a result of these authorizations are picked up and extensively reviewed and then addressed adequately. Next slide, please. Now we come to pharmacovigilance. The good thing with the FDA is that we have a couple of expert committees. We have that for medicines, we have that for vaccines and biological products, we have that for medical devices, we have that for food and nutrition. So these expert committees are a group of experts from academia, from research, from industry, and from advocacy groups. And then what we do is that we rapidly bring them together to form joint expert committees on safety of a particular product. So currently during the COVID-19 vaccines, we had that for expert committee for COVID-19 vaccines. We have another committee for the malaria vaccine. and these committees work on safety issues which comes up as a result of the administration of such products. So this is something that we intend going forward, rapidly bringing together, co-opting members from the existing expert committees to form a standing committee to help the FDA in making decisions going forward. Again, conversion of a lot of in-person and face-to-face activities into virtual activities. We have extensively, we are involved in PV sensitization training at the level of the healthcare facilities. And then what we have converted some of them from in-person to virtual, and we believe we will go forward with that. And then also virtual meetings of expert committees we do have. It used to be extensively face-to-face, and now we have a hybrid system of face-to-face or virtual. And then again, we came up with this active follow-up of products which have been granted marketing authorization or conditional authorization. When the product, we believe that the benefit is quite huge, it outweighs the risk of limited data submitted, then what we do is that we do active follow-ups when we know that to capture safety issues which may arise as a result of the use of these particular products. So I think this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was really terrific. Not only did you give us a really good overview of all the many kinds of adaptations that you made during that period, but I think, you gave us a lot of food for thought for things you're going to continue as well, and why. I'm sure we'll have more questions about that, but thank you for setting that all up. And speaking of questions, I just want to remind everyone, to use the Q&A section of the webinar platform, because we definitely want to set aside a lot of time for questions and answers from the audience. So please enter those. But now, before we go onto that panel, we'd like to hear a couple of other perspectives, and these are from some of the associations organizations that are really familiar with manufacturing, either globally or specifically on the African continent. And so I'd like to turn it over first to Nick from IGBA.
Well, thank you very much, Ginny, and thanks to IFPMA for inviting me to present briefly on the part of IGBA. For those of you that don't know that are in the audience, IGBA is the Global Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association, and we represent generic and biosimilar medicines manufacturers from around the world. So, as I listened to what the presentation from Jackie, I would say, yes, she presented, a very good view of how industry, including generics, would look at some of the things that we saw happening with regulatory flexibility during the pandemic. The situation with generics was a little different, certainly, than the innovative industry, since, we don't manufacture vaccines, and many of the direct new medicines that would be addressed towards a COVID outbreak would not be necessarily key to us. But what was key was the disruption in supply chain for many critical medicines that were used in the treatment of COVID. And this caused real problems around the globe. COVID caused many problems. Capacities were constrained, by nature. And so many countries needed to find alternate ways to supply the products to their patients. So what was important in this environment was ability for post-approval type change situations. And that would include both review of dossiers potentially, or review of inspection reports and so on. So what we saw was what worked well, I think, was the collaboration among the agencies globally, communication, really in sharing information and sharing strategies around supplying these products. This was very key. What was necessary in order for that to happen, though, was mentioned before, were common technical standards. And indeed, that made, the information sharing more valuable, and reliance on other people's reviews and inspections and so on. So, I would say that, in these days you have ICH, you have WHO, we're preparing technical guidelines. I'd encourage the African regulatory agencies to take advantage of those associations to make sure that they are aware of what's happening, are involved in what's happening, because this really, at least from the generic side, is very important. And then the other thing is flexibility in some of the technical standards, even if going outside what the guidelines recommend. That was also very useful. One of the issues was API, right? Getting the drug substance into the manufacturers. And maybe the original source was not available to that country because it wasn't part of the application. Having a speedy acceptance of an alternate source utilizing information from another regulatory agency was key. And then relaxing some of the standards. In some cases, because of the capacity constraints, new sites of manufacture needed to be found quickly. So ordinarily, you would expect a certain amount of stability data or other requirements. There was some flexibility in relaxing some of the normal standards in those cases. So that's on a case-by-case basis. But clearly, the ability for agencies to react, properly and scientifically in concert with each other was really important. And going forward, I think the regulators already, at least the ones that I'm aware of, are already working on ways to leverage some of the learnings from the pandemic and encourage the African regulatory community to take advantage of those discussions and adopt some of the procedures that they're talking about. So I leave it at that for now. I'm happy to have any questions about the role of generics in this, and really appreciate having the opportunity to be part of this this important discussion.
Thank you. It's very helpful. And it's good to note that supply chain was such a big impact, and it continues to be in different ways. We always need to be looking at ways we can address and improve in that area. And we've heard a lot about that with the PACs and other sessions as well. And we've got another speaker, Wilberforce, who will be representing the Federation of African Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Associations. So that's a great perspective about what was going on with manufacturing on the continent. We'd love to hear your thoughts about both what worked then and what we'd like to see continue.
Thank you very much for having me here. We appreciate the invitation to FAPMA. I'm standing in for President Emmanuel Mijuru, who is traveling, and I'll fill into his space. Just little to say that FAPMA is represents the regional organizations within Africa, the East Africa, Southern Africa, and West Africa, and was formed in 2019. We're still young, trying to tackle quite a number of issues, but the key objective is really to develop a self-sustaining pharmaceutical manufacturing industry in Africa and share experiences of manufacturers with the regulators and other policy makers and the international NGO world. This is just to make sure that there is access of medicines to those who need it. I'll just mention very little bit about the objective for this meeting, but also to say I join and agree with the presentation of Nick and Edwin. They have given quite a good perspective of the manufacturers in Africa. Indeed, we do not have much on vaccine space. However, we do, the African-based manufacturers do other products. The questions one would want to ask on this basis of agility and where we are going to is that should we start reinventing the wheel? We are just in the formative stages of AMA. And AMA, right from the word go, we would like to say, is still not yet there. It's still not tangible organization, but very much a lot of work has been done to make it so. We are looking at the building blocks that have been developed in the other areas, the REC harmonization, the NMRA, ongoing levels, the roadmap and risk categorization of the manufacturers. And indeed, we have also the pharmacovigilance activities, which Edwin also mentioned. I would like to say that from FAPMA's point of view, we need to look at what would be the governance structure of AMA, so that those structural arrangement of AMA will be able to adapt quite a number of things which have already been made. And just not going into details because of the time, look at what are the way forward. What is the way forward? And the way forward is that we must look at this, how the member states and how the government structure of AMA will be, and utilize the existing data. AMA to avoid also the already done work, so that we move much more on the harmonization activities which have already taken place. We have GMP inspections which have taken place regionally, medicines registration, the pharmacovigilance activities. There's a lot of data that has been generated in those areas. And therefore, AMA is to innovate new management status that will incorporate all what I have mentioned, especially when it comes to GMP certification, and even including the API issues, which was a really problem during the COVID, the source, so that is virtually acceptable, documented, which are the right sources for the African-based manufacturers. And also the work that has already come out of these activities, we have preferential procurement programs that should be developed using the data of the already products which have been registered, and look also at products, just to mention on pharmacovigilance and product recalls or non-compliance, use that as a basis for capacity building where it's necessary, because some of these things offer very good opportunity for capacity building in our countries and even in the region. I will not go much more into that. Let me stop there, but thank you very much, and hoping that if there is any other clarification, we'll pick it up in the question time. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. That was terrific. And I think, you're ending on talking about data, right? We have a lot of data, and we're all data-driven organizations, and we want that data to underpin our decisions going forward. Because I think, as Edwin, you said earlier with FDA, you are always, you still have to maintain those standards. The standards haven't changed. We're just looking at maybe some different ways to address them. And so the data help us understand that we are meeting them in these cases, and perhaps in other cases have not gone down the path because of concerns. And that's where I think we're looking at focusing now, right? Is what can we continue, and why, and how do we just improve the process for that we get those products to patients safely. So now we're going to open it up for a panel discussion. And like I said, we welcome comments and questions from the audience. And you can put them in the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand, even like them, so that if you note a like for a question, that'll start rising up to the top. I think we're going to put the results of the Mentimeter up here as well. Okay. So we saw definitely the e-submissions, really critical. So it looks like we have two top ones, and then we kind of had a tie for the third. So the e-submissions, e-documents, the joint regional initiatives that we're talking about with Reliance. And that, of course, we also heard about extending all the way to the CTAs, right? That goes throughout the process. And then looking at the virtual meetings and similar, applying some virtual techniques to the inspections, and sometimes having those as the collaborative ones, right, with other health authorities. And then the no samples required in support of post-approval changes. So I think maybe just a nod from the panelists. Any question, any comments, or any surprises?
I would say this. I'd say this is a very smart audience. I think they got it right. From my point of view anyway. I think the top two are clearly the ones that have the most benefit. And it's hard to pick between, say, the next three as to really which one is more important. So this is, I think, is really a good summary of where the most important areas are. That would be my view.
Yeah. Any other comments from panelists?
I think I am quite in line with what has been shared. Basically, that is what is actually being practiced now, and that's what everybody wants. I'm quite sure remote monitoring of clinical trials that will come on at a later stage, because we need to build confidence. We need to build we have to be confident in the structures, in the systems, and not only at the regulatory end, at the ethics committee end, and also at the end of the PI sites where trials are conducted. So I think it's going to take some time to improve the scores for remote monitoring of clinical trials. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a tough one, right? Because that's down to the safety of participants right there at the trial level. You need to be really careful with, and privacy issues, et cetera. And systems that protect those.
And Ginny, yeah. I'm also very much aligned. No surprises there, because indeed, before collaboration, reliance, or anything, the regulator needs to receive the document. And so if there's a mechanism to facilitate access via use of e-tools, then definitely that is very welcoming. And as we have heard, use of digital tools and having the appropriate digital infrastructure really is the backbone on which all the regulatory processes thrive. So no surprises there myself also. Thanks.
Right, and getting that information, right? So you can appropriately rely as appropriate for the jurisdiction and the product. Anything from you, Wilberforce?
No, I would say, when I look at the scores on implementation of virtual meetings with the national regulatory authorities, the score looks low. I was surprised, but it can be improved. One thing that we have seen with this virtual space is that if you ask them to connect, however weak the system is, they look for a place where you can have the internet and all these things. Of course, realizing that there are differences between countries and so forth. And that is one thing. The other comment I would just say on collaborative hybrid virtual inspections, this should be promoted as much as possible because it lowers the cost for travel, the logistic cost for traveling and so forth. Now, if we are building already the harmonized GMP inspections, then there already exists reports for serious manufacturers have been inspected severally and jointly. And this needs to be promoted so that we can be able now to save on the others and promote those companies who are already at a high level of GMP status. And therefore, I would think that the hybrid virtual inspection should be encouraged.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And I would say in regards to that, I mean, ICMRA has this pilot program now doing just that, exploring how that could work and getting industry's viewpoint on it. Few companies have participated. It's relatively limited now, but the lessons learned could be applied anywhere around the globe. So that's actually a current activity of ICMRA, which is hopefully going to yield some good results.
Right. And to that point, that is one program, and there are other approaches, and people have applied them. You can apply it without that program, right? The health authorities could proceed and build something else as well. We've got some questions from the audience, and maybe I will start there. We got one about the open program from EMA. And we know during the pandemic, EMA created that open program where the evaluators from non-EU health authorities could participate in, listen to and participate in the CHMP, the medical products discussions, where products, the evaluations are being discussed. Today, the EMA is enlarging the scope of the program, the open program. And the question is it a reliance way that African countries would like to see more of in the future? We've got regional programs, different programs. Then there's this also EMA one where non-EU countries are allowed to come in, invited to participate in the review discussions about a product. Is that something African regulators believe would be interested in? Maybe, Edwin, seems like that's a great one to tee up for you.
Thank you very much, Ginny. I'm not so familiar with this this open program, but I think I could speak to it from the little description you've just submitted. I believe what each and every NRA would want to do is to ensure that there is rapid access to these life-saving interventions. So any approach, any outlet that would allow us to extensively and rapidly review applications and make a decision on time and in time to make sure that these products are available, well, I think we will have to embrace that and move on. I think this is another area where we can also build on the existing reliance policies and structures to promote access to medicines. So I believe any approach, any outlet that is geared towards making medicines available, well, I think NRAs are ready and willing to adopt and then move it on. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really great, thoughtful response. And I think your intro is really telling. There are a lot now. There are just different programs, and a lot got stood up, different things during the pandemic. And so it's not surprising, that people haven't heard really about open. But I think it was effective for the programs that did use it. But your response to say, look, we all are interested in improving that access of these important new products, to patients. And how do we do that? Maybe in the policy community, it's incumbent upon us too to make sure that we do think about how we have a dialogue about the opportunities and the some of the successes and the approaches that some of these regulators and other entities have used. So thank you for that response. Does anybody else want to chime in on that? Anybody's experience?
I'll just add quickly.
Yeah.
One thing during the pandemic time is already too late for certain arrangements, because we do not know what kind of the pandemic that is going to come. We are only learning from the previous ones. So in saying so, it means that especially for when you are developing AMA and other organizations, that the pre-pandemic times, we should be able to establish collaborative ideals with the existing organizations, so that you have some agreement or MOU that in event of a pandemic, if they do certain work, you don't have to repeat it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we rely on the information because we have been working together with those organizations on a collaborative arrangements, and be able now to move forward without setting up committees and committees for what they may not even understand the kind of new pandemic it is. And that's my way of looking at it.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Ginny, maybe if I can add, I think that our experience as industry has also been that, like Edwin said, the regulators are looking to make the products accessible as fast as they can, but they also have an interest in protecting the public health by ensuring the safety and the quality of these medicines. So I think that the open program, it's a very great opportunity, because a lot of times in our interactions with regulators on the continent, yes, they want to use reliance, but one of the key principles of reliance is also transparency. And so if a regulator has been a part of, the assessment in the first place, they've had firsthand, experience whilst EMA is assessing the dossier, then at the national level, it's much easier and faster to implement, because they've already would have had access to whatever you're submitting. So I think it's a great opportunity also.
Yeah. And to follow on from that, I mean, what we're all saying is, of course, like learning from which is why a conference like this is, of course, great. Having these conversations again to remind us of pandemic times, future times, and it may not just be the pandemic going forward, right? We're talking about all these different needs for different new important medicines, or continuing, Nick, to your point, biosimilars and generics, and making sure we get products globally available to patients if they haven't already been available. It's so important. But to have this dialogue for just normal times, to make sure that we are all thinking about using those resources, like you mentioned, Jacqueline, appropriately, the transparency of the reviews, transparency from companies about where we've been and what's the important parts of our medicine, so that the regulators can make the key decisions. You can decide, as you said, Edwin, wholly or in part on another regulator's decision based upon your needs, based upon what you see there and what your population needs. So I think these are all just really key, good principles for us to be discussing. Yeah,
I could chime in there a little bit, Ginny. You're right. I mean, this isn't just about pandemic times. It's about normal times. And we all know drug shortages exist today, right? So anything we can do to assure, a robust supply chain, both from the industry as well as the regulator's perspective, we should be thinking about those things and doing everything possible to make that happen. And having the drugs available with some assurance in each of the markets, is really important. And the pandemic taught us, though, that so manufacturers make to demand, right? And when the demand increases all of a sudden because a particular therapy becomes much greater than normal, that's a problem. But having more ability to flex in those situations is really key. So there's no simple answer to this, but it's something that everybody's lived through now. So hopefully we're learning and we're going to adapt.
A great point there that you just said too. We're learning. We've lived through it. We're learning. So let's take those. It's not just theoretical, right? And so how we establish trust among parties and understanding about how these procedures can work and make sure that we do meet those patient needs is through this learning and this working together through some of the challenges that we all face and continue to face. So thank you. And I know we've got another question about, and I think this one goes to ethics committee. So I think, this is going to come to, probably Edwin and Jacqueline, maybe you can also chime in, but, how can we achieve better convergence, harmonization, and streamlining of ethics committees approvals? And I know you talked about that, Edwin. I thought how you approached that was, so interesting, because so often people don't really understand the impact of disparate timelines between the ethics committees and the national competent authorities, and the trickle down, but important and critical trickle down on the ability to get up those trials and start them for patients. So I'd love your further elaboration on that, because you were able to do that. It looks like you've set up that infrastructure. How could we achieve the better maybe convergence about that with other regulators as well?
Thank you very much, Ginny. That's an interesting one. For instance, in Ghana, we have institutional review boards. They are much more independent boards. Some are situated in research institutes. We have one in the Ghana Health Service. So depending on where the trial will have to be conducted, that is where you submit your applications. Of course, the issue of harmonization and convergence in relation to decision-making, that is going to be a difficult task. One of the, if I am to share this, one of the requirements or one of the recommendations that came up after our WHO GBT audit was also to encourage Ghana to form more or less an overarching body that more or less monitor and then the work of the ethics committee. But I think we are still in the process of pursuing that and ensuring that such a body is in place. And I believe when such a body is in place, that is when harmonization and convergence of systems and structures within those bodies will be achieved. But I think one other thing I think I may attempt to speak to will be a situation whereby, similarly to the GBT, where NRAs are benchmarked, I think ethics committees can also be benchmarked and then results published so that it will be a form of reliance, transparency, promoting such committees. So in the event that you are in a particular country and then you know that this particular ethics committee in this particular country has been benchmarked, and then we are aware of the systems and structures in place that came up with a certain decision, one can easily trust such decisions coming out of such committees. So I think a system where these various committees or boards are in terms of best practices, I think that will promote, will be the baseline or the baseline for promoting convergence and harmonization. I think that this is my little take on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big take. I think that's really interesting. It's both the overarching structure and approach, but also the training and execution and competence building that has to go into place, has to enable the benchmarking, right? So it's all of that. So thank you. I don't know if anybody wants to build on that. Jacqueline, if you have anything you want to add, or that was really very helpful.
No, thanks, Jeannie. I think that Edwin has so eloquently addressed that because a lot of times what we see is the delays normally do not come from the regulator, even though the ultimate approval comes from the regulator. The delays normally come from the ethical review board. So if there is, like Edwin was suggesting, if there's an overarching body that embodies all the stakeholders, including the regulators, where a decision can be made, I think that would help with the process. And then, of course, I also like the idea of the benchmarking as well. Great insights. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought so too. We have another one for you, Edwin, from the Q&A. It says, the question is, has the Ghana FDA implemented an electronic platform to help manage new clinical trial applications in the review and approval? So basically, how are you doing that with your CTAs? And I heard you also say there is some reliance, right? You actually sometimes employ that tool. But do you have an electronic platform to help you with that?
Thank you very much, Jeannie. I think we are in the process of actually deploying an electronic platform where submissions can be made, and then at each stage of the evaluation process, the applicant or manufacturer will be alerted of that particular stage, and then at the end of the day, the actual decision outcome can also be alerted. The applicant or the manufacturer will be alerted. We are in the process of deploying that. I believe that we are in an advanced stage, and hopefully by close of the year, we should be able to deploy that.
Wow, that's great. Maybe our requester had some insight into that. Been nice to get that timing and thank you. Another question we got was if anyone wants to expand on the virtual inspection. And so I think with that, maybe it's the question of, we can see the opportunity, right? And maybe we can talk about the opportunity, some of the challenges, and how we would address those going forward, because the opportunity is so significant. I think, as we heard, it saves resources, it enables things to go more quickly. It's a timely. But have there been, what kind of challenges does anybody want to raise, or just really success stories?
Well, I could start here. I mean, there's two parts of this. One is the collaborative aspect, and the other is the virtual aspect.
Yeah. Right.
So if you're talking about just the purely virtual inspection by one agency, well, that may be the simpler case, right? And and there, I mean, the benefit to that, as somebody mentioned before, these travel costs and so forth and so on, they add up for agencies and so on. So the ability to do an inspection without having to travel obviously has economic benefits, as well as some timing benefits also in terms of being flexible and scheduling these things. And and I know, at least from the US FDA side, they do virtual inspections now in some instances where the inspectors actually don't have to come on site. It's a combination of video streaming of various things they want to see, in combination with document review remotely and streaming type environment to discuss issues. So that already exists, and it's it requires the technology to do that, but it's certainly achievable with today's technology. But doing that collaboratively with another agency is another way to do that, where true reliance on another's inspection report doesn't exist, and an agency feels they need to have a hand in this inspection themselves. They can collaborate virtually with inspectors who are on site doing the inspection. And that's probably the most universally applicable way of going about it, and maybe has the most potential for sort of a most advantage to everybody concerned. And the idea is, if everybody's looking for the same things in terms of GMP compliance and so on, then you rely on on trusted partners to do the job. Or if you still feel you need to see it for yourselves, then you can collaborate virtually. So the technology exists to do that. It does require some legal constraints on the part of some agencies and things like that, but it can be done, and it's currently in practice and being practiced, and holds great value for the future, in my view.
And maybe just to add to that, is that certainly, and this has been going on for at least a couple of decades, right? The collaborative practices related to inspections. Now, those are in-person ones, but that understanding of the benefits of collaborative either inspections or mutual recognition inspections, not having to go to the same facility, but saying and this gets into that legal part too, who's relying on who, what confidentiality agreements, but the tremendous benefits that health authorities and industry and patients can see if we get that part right, by saying, you've already done it, I know you. It's similar to reliance along the whole spectrum, right? CTAs, inspections, and different aspects of the dossier review and submission.
Yeah, but in terms of flexibility, I mean, I mentioned timing. You can schedule these things a lot quicker than you could in the case of a pandemic situation. You could schedule these things, literally within days, whereas on-site inspections typically require, on the part of parties, at least the regulators, probably months to really get a scheduled inspection, set up. So this has real advantages in terms of timing and ability to act in a crisis.
And visa requirements and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I don't know, does anybody else have something they want to chime in about either the virtual or the hybrid collaborative?
Yes, maybe I can chime in. I definitely subscribe to all the benefits that Nick and Wilberforce mentioned earlier on, of the hybrid inspections. On the part of industry also, we also did face, innovative industry, that is, despite the benefits, we faced some challenges with the hybrid inspections, in the sense that sometimes they were a lot longer and resource intensive, in the sense that they needed a lot of documents to be put together. We needed to put together so many documents to accommodate the inspection. So like Nick is saying, maybe we can look at a way for reliance if one agency has inspected a site, then we can use risk-based tools like desktop reviews. We did see some desk reviews using risk-based approaches in some cases to do the assessment rather than going on site or in that case. So those were some of the issues that we found, that compiling all of the various documents that were required for hybrid inspection sometimes were a bit laborious and took quite a longer and resource to put together. So a way that we can look at collaborations and then reliance also as we look at hybrid inspections or remote inspections would be ideal.
Yeah.
I would say I would look at the
just
hybrid
add on,
inspections. I would look at the hybrid inspections as a stepping stone to the mutual recognitions in a sense, because it would be a confidence building exercise for many of the agencies involved, and they could get a feel for how this would work and, and share the load at some point to do the inspections in their home nations and so on. So yeah, I mean, we have to get there first. And as Jackie points out, other agencies have collaborated over the years in this kind of thing. Others have not. It's new to them, and they're a little bit, and then it's not just the inspectorates, but it's the national health authorities, that are also concerned about this. And so it's a confidence building move to me. I'm sorry, Wilberforce, to interrupt.
No, that's fine. That's why it was a useful one. I just want to add on that notwithstanding the challenges, because we know the challenges at the facility level, the regulatory level, and there are quite a number of challenges which one can list. But the most important thing is not to dwell too much on the challenges and looking at the solutions. And the solutions really that these facilities are going to immediately this comments on the virtual or hybrid inspections, they're already starting to capacity build. They're going to share information. And this is some of the attributes that we need to start looking at. Then we may be able to maybe mention that the first point of an inspection when manufacturer has already made an expression of interest is to seek whether what's the latest inspection report that they have received either from a regional organization or from the national organization. And if you look, regulatory authorities, I mean, and the NMRS, once you have those two basic things, the reports, it's a very good starting point now to start an interaction with the manufacturer and also with the regulator, because the regulator may not have seen everything, but with this kind of interaction with an expert, they'll be able now to counter check because they are on site.
Yeah.
Then there is a development of the CAPA. In my experience is that quite development of CAPA is becomes a problem, because the findings have been made, but you can't just make the right CAPA. No, that makes also brings in the opportunity to train them to capacity build on that. And this interaction on a virtual basis will take maybe 2-3 hours, and the manufacturer and the regulator will now go to the depth of it, and then you leave it now to confidence building stage where the domestic NMRA goes on site to verify some of the things and bring them on board. Now, once that is done repeatedly, you will find that you are on the same page.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I like some of the themes of all of this. We're talking about, I think Edwin talks about risk-based things. You're looking at some of your committees and what's being addressed and what you're allowing for conditional approval, but then risk-based address kind of the gaps, the things that you want to address. And I think Wilberforce, you were just saying the same thing here. You may, or a related, analogous, you're going to have the expression of interest, you're going to have the other inspection, but there's potential gap. And we need to fill that gap as industry, as manufacturers, to make sure the regulator gets that picture of what the whole, so I guess what I'm trying to say is we all stakeholders have responsibilities in this space to know what we need to provide, to do that, to do things in a timely way, to try not to be duplicative, but try to make sure that we, address the questions that the regulators need, and regulators likewise from us. So I'm sorry, I can see Edwin look like you have a question.
Yeah, yes. Just to add to what my colleagues have just submitted to. In Ghana, for instance, some of these authorizations have been granted on the basis of desk review of GMP compliance. So, and then this is leveraging our reliance policy. So, on the basis of compliant GMP, we grant authorization to such products. But I believe there is a space for virtual inspection. The belief is that can only be enforced when confidence is built on the risk-based approach, when we know that a particular facility has a consistent history of compliance to GMP. And then when we have that particular data, I believe that virtual inspections, the regulators will have the confidence enough to move a step further, a step closer to virtual inspections, and then eventually granting GMP certification based on virtual inspections. Because we already have these documented policies for well-resourced NRAs, countries where a well-resourced NRA has gone on site to audit a manufacturing site. We based on that decision and then grant authorization. I think if a time is going to come in the basis of risk-based approach, when we are confident enough that particular facility has consistently been compliant with GMP, I believe we will move a step further closer to virtual inspections. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. It takes us to that data, right? Risk-based risk analysis, factor that into the data that we've got on facilities as to go together, and then trust and confidence moving forward. There are themes about a lot of the things we've talked about. It kind of takes me to maybe a wrap-up question for each person to think about, which is to think about how these efforts can help stimulate innovation, regulatory science, and systems in Africa in particular. Like, how do we leverage this? Are there ways we can work together? Do you believe that this work, I think we've all kind of been saying this, but just, kind of maybe put a bow in this, to say, how does this stimulate innovation and improved approaches with all of us to make sure we get the medicines to patients? Nobody disagrees with that statement, I'm assuming. That we all think we've got learnings that are actually helping. I think that's kind of the summary, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
So maybe I can go first. I definitely agree with that statement. And earlier in the conference, at the opening, Dr. Margaret Sigonda of the AD in NEPAD highlighted in her address that prior to the institution of the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, only 7% of African NRAs had moderate capacity, with over 90% of NRAs having limited or no capacity. And then Dr. Marina Santos, also from WHO, in her overview of facilitated pathways, mentioned that the use of joint assessment procedures and reliance pathways is not only a way to ensure efficiencies within the NRAs, but to also build capacity through work sharing mechanisms. And in the promotion of harmonized requirements, use of reliance, and then use of digital tools such as ECPPs, EGMPs, etc., we do have an opportunity to drive innovation on the continent, and then also set AMA up for success, the African Medicines Agency, that is. So again, to echo Teresa from today's session, work sharing, reliance, digitalization are today's innovation tools. So I definitely do agree with you on that statement. Thanks.
Anybody else? I've got a comment that I'm going to read from the audience, and I think also address some of this. But does anybody else have anything that you want to add to that statement?
I would just maybe, if you allow me to first to go.
Yeah,
just to say, digital space is here.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way you're going to go back.
Yeah.
And because we have allowed it's ongoing, it means that our manufacturers, our regulators, our policymakers must enter into that space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be more efficient, more collaborative, better a sharing of ideas than if we resorted back to the physical meetings. So physical should come as a consequence to resolve some of the issues that have arisen, and of course, for better knowing each other and each country's operations. But most decisions would have been taken in the digital space, and that's the way to go.
Yeah. So thank you. That's actually, I mean, I know we're really at time here. So I just want to say thank you. In the comment, you're going to see just something that kind of ties into what we've all been saying, but maybe being intentional and having some more conferences, more written agreements about some of the work that we're engaged in, more trainings, digitalization, so super important, but we're always keeping our eye on cybersecurity and privacy is one of the things. But you know, we're in this collectively to advance these new initiatives or any kind of improvements we can have in regulatory science and regulatory processes so that we can get our products to patients. And you can see the key takeaways that the primary goal is to get that rapid access in the pandemic, but we want to make sure that we are promoting that innovation. I think we've been talking about this all along. And use of those tools we've talked about are key areas. We'll continue to find more and grow on them. And you know, they've been important, and we can continue to work on improving them both through workshops, through written agreements, through all kinds of experience and shaping the environment. But we have those commitments to quality, safety, and efficacy. I think we keep heading back on that risk-based, data-driven approaches to make sure that as we move forward with implementing these solutions, they really meet all the stakeholders' needs, most importantly, the patient. So thank you all for participating. It's been a great session. Really learned a lot and enjoyed being here with you.